Thank you so much, Nivedita. Glad to be here. Karan, welcome on the show today. Thanks for joining us. I hope all of you are enjoying the conference, the 13th edition of it so far. And just to get right into it, Karan, I think Pari's talk for the last 15 minutes did focus about anti-fragility and how it relates to the technology ecosystem. What's the playbook of it? And if you look at the central idea of anti-fragility, it's really about gaining more than losing, right? But the issue really is that there are so many unknowns in the future, right? There are so many of these black swan events that one can't really predict, right, by any means of intelligence, right? So in that kind of a situation, just to quickly get started, right? What's your point of view in terms of how do companies become anti-fragile, right? What do they do to really gain more than lose out of any future critical situations, if you will?
Thank you, Praveen. Thank you very much. And first of all, let me thank you all for inviting me this morning. It is a very intriguing theme that you've chosen, anti-fragility, and I had to literally sort of think a lot about the nuances around this subject. But specific to the point that you brought about, I fundamentally believed in looking out for what you called as the unknown unknowns, and Pari mentioned that as well. But you really, some of these things, you don't know what you don't know. And in today's context, uncertainty is the only certainty, is the best way I can describe it. And that's a very unsettling reality as we face it today. Businesses, they face risks around every corner that they are unaware of. The challenges are coming from places and environments that they had not conceived. A lot of us had set up business continuity plans that have been severely challenged. And in most cases, people are facing a situation that they had no prior knowledge of or no historical evidence of, at least in our lifetimes. So the challenge for businesses looking to minimize risks and maximize the gains from disruptions is to better understand two things, as I say, the known knowns and the known unknowns. And then you have contingencies in place for the unknown unknowns, which is the toughest part. At the core of an anti-fragile organization's construct, in my opinion, is actually agility. Most organizations, as we have seen enough evidence from the traditional industry, they're built around very static, siloed, structural hierarchy. Whereas an agile organization is actually, on the contrary, it is characterized by a network of teams operating in a very rapid learning, agile environment where decision making cycles happen way faster than traditional organizations. Most organizations, they place their governance bodies at the apex, and the decision rights flow down the hierarchy. Whereas in agile organizations, it instills a common purpose across the organization, and you use new data on a daily basis to give decision rights to the team that are closest to the information, or in many cases, closest to the customer. That organization can really combine velocity, adaptability with stability and efficiency. So I think that's really the nuance around handling the unknown unknowns. While you can't foresee everything, it's your response mechanism to that environment that'll determine how successfully or not you come out of it. And then, in my view, there is this aspect of how do we embrace technology in these times. And the second part is how do we invest in innovation. Let me start with innovation. In my view, innovation has always captured the fancy of people. It's had very high mind share, but not has as much wallet share in most cases. People have had, I call it the piloted approach to innovation, where they try on the fringe innovation in their organizations, whereas disruption hits your core. So I think one advice I would have for everyone is that as you come out of this, as you emerge from this crisis, innovate on scale. And the second aspect is how we embrace technology in our organizations. If you look at the way technology has been adopted in traditional enterprise, it's very elitist in nature. The higher up in the hierarchy you are, or let me use a hierarchical view, the deeper end of the technology usage patterns you get access to, and as you go down the chain, you get very minimalist. And in this time, everyone's needed the same access to technology. So I call it the democratization of technology. So those two things, in my view, will have to change. One is the approach to innovation, and second is the approach to technology adoption. If we have to really address the unknown unknowns in the future, Praveen, that's kind of my view on this subject. Back to
Got
you.
it. So innovation and technology at the core of it. I think Pari talked about some bit of that as well. I want to go back a little bit in history, right? And not like a recent history, maybe, where we had events like 9/11 and we had events like Brexit more recently or the financial crisis of 2008. And you were at different sort of companies, right? You were at Cisco, you were at IBM, you were at Microsoft, and you have seen and lived through some of these crises in the past, right? What have been your core learnings, and how have you used those learnings to build the anti-fragile organization for the future?
Sure, Praveen. I've had the fortune of working through a fairly diverse set of organizations, global as well as local. And without reference to any particular organization, I wouldn't sort of comment on any particular organization's ability or lack thereof. But without reference to any particular organization, my belief is an organization's response to change and success thereof is completely dependent on its ability to break tradition. How an organization breaks tradition. Some organizations have a very incremental mindset to change, just given the fact that it's stuff's working for them and they don't feel the need to change. Whereas some have actually put everything on the table and everything is up for a debate. And I've seen both the scenarios and outcomes have been extremely diverse in the situation. In one case, I would say the value of the organizations are significantly compounded once they broke tradition. And in another, where there was a more incremental approach to change, I would say the outcomes have not been very positive. So I've seen two extremes in that sense. And in many cases, we talk about who's the custodian of the tradition. The custodian of tradition in an organization is not the organizational fabric, it's actually the people in the organization. It's the people in the organization that are the custodians of any tradition, and the resistance or inertia to change actually emanates from people and not anything else in the organization. Um, and really, a leader's ability to build an organization, if you will, that serves the market need and changes will determine what the outcomes are really. I've seen leaders build org structures, and a typical way of building an org structure is you think about the people you have, and then you start putting them in the places that they would be best effective in, and that's how you build an org. I've seen organizations built like that. But the classic way of building, the real way of building an org is you actually put the boxes first that serve the customer, that serve the market transition, that serve the challenges in the market, and then you start putting in the boxes. And I have seen those both approaches at play with very different results, the results being very, very obvious. One of the leaders, again, no names I would take, advised me, and the individual said, take your people decisions fast. And that was the advice given, while reflecting on that individual's own ability or inability to do that. So my learning is that during a crisis, and this crisis is absolutely not to be wasted, when you go back to your offices, put everything on the table, put everything that you do up for a debate, and ask yourself 3 times before you go back and do things the way you were doing before the crisis. And that's kind of really the way that you would reinvent ourselves. And I really hope that our response to the next crisis, God forbid, our response to the next crisis will not be created during the crisis, but we are more ready for the extremity of the crisis that we are facing today, Praveen.
Got it. So talking about a little bit of future crisis, and hopefully we don't have such kind of severe crisis anymore, at least in our lifetimes. But Jeff Bezos once said that it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen in the future, but it's very predictable to know what things will never change in the future, right? For example, in their case, it was all about customers' expectations of getting things cheaper. I don't think it's going to change in 100 years to come, right?
Sure.
What are those certainties that you have in your business, and not necessarily Google, but as a technology veteran, Karan, what are the things that are not going to change in the future in your view?
Let me first take a shot at the point from a Google perspective. If you go back to the late 90s, the founding mission of Google was really to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Now, that 20 years ago is even truer today and more important to tackle today in a world where people look to whether it is devices, to help organize their day, get them from one place to another, keep in touch with each other during this crisis. During this time, the ability to be online has been a lifeline for so many of us. whether you are a small business trying to stay afloat, you are a parent looking for updates on how to protect yourself and your family, you're a student trying to keep up with your courseware in these tough times. And being helpful in these moments is at the core of what the mission of our company has been always, and that stays. That's not changed, only further reinforced. We're looking forward to continuing the work of building a much more inclusive and accessible internet for everyone. And I'm using Google as an example of how a timeless mission statement inspires each one of us at Google. I spoke about the democratization of technology. That's at the core of what Google wants to achieve in everything that they do, that we do. For us, technology is not about the devices or the products that we build. Those aren't the end goals. Technology is really the democratizing force, empowering people through the information that they need on a daily basis. This company is an information company, and when it was founded, it was an information company, and it is today an information company. And it's what people do with the information that amazes and inspires us to recreate magic every single day. That's more the Google context. From an industry standpoint, I think change is a given. We've seen, in my 30 years of being in the tech industry, I've seen so many transitions, and yet every transition feels like the boldest one than the prior ones, and that chasm continues. I think ability to respond to change and openness to respond to change will be at the heart of, and focus on the customer will be at the heart of our ability to continue reinventing ourselves, Praveen.
I think the focus on customer is a very important one. In fact, most of the leading companies follow the customer first, employee second, and shareholder third kind of a philosophy. Not many people know this, Karan, but Jeff Bezos, as you're aware, was an early investor, very early investor in Google. And in the last 20 years, Jeff has gone from being an investor to a head-on competitor in many parts of your business, right? So do you think of that motion as part of the anti-fragile long-term thinking to compete and be ready in an agile way to be able to compete with the newer forces of the market, if you will?
Look, Praveen, I think the world is one of very interesting partnerships now. You will many times compete with the very people that you co-opt with. So I don't think there are any hard lines that are going to be drawn. The classic partners of your past may not be the partners of your future, and more so may not. I'm very convinced they will not be the partners of the future. So I think times will change. We will have to push the boundary on partnerships and look for areas of collaboration, and yet be able to compete effectively where we need to. So I would say it's an era of partnerships, an era of differentiated partnerships, and all of us got to brace up to that reality of the new future.
So talking about the era of partnership, Karan, your business, Google's business, both in India and globally, is driven in large parts by resellers, distributors, system integrators, startups, ISV, and whatnot, right?
Sure.
What does it mean for them to be anti-fragile, right? Is it enough that if Google is going to be anti-fragile, they will in turn any which way become anti-fragile, or they would need to do certain things differently to participate in the opportunities going forward?
Praveen, in my view, they would need to break the tradition in the same magnitude as the technology companies themselves. Technology companies significantly rely on this ecosystem to actually reach the customer. So, if that part of the ecosystem is not changing as fast as the technology is, there is some casualty happening, and in most cases, it's what the customer receives. The customer will not be the recipient of the goodness of technology in that sense. So my call to this ecosystem, and they have been reinventing themselves. Look at how the technology consumption models have changed, Praveen. In the past, we had a model of technology consumption where you had to buy hardware, software, services, ongoing upgrades, services, etc. And I'm not saying that's gone away or that will go away like tomorrow, but that is changing significantly. And this moment that we are living has only accelerated that consumption model. As customers come out of this, the one scarce commodity that's going to be there is going to be capital, and people's ability to invest capital in anything beyond the core of their business. So if I'm a healthcare provider, I'm going to be looking for more beds and more equipments to support patients, and yet I need more technology. So technology will have to be absorbed. I guess the overall spend on technology will increase, but it is about how do we lower the entry barrier of consuming technology, which is the consumption model. And so these ecosystem partners, you named a few, will have to start being ready to embrace the new model of consumption with these customers. and be ready for that change that will happen. And equally so, I would say that there'd be new partnerships, as I said earlier, on the horizon. One of the recent announcements we made was a partnership with Airtel, where we are now working with Airtel to take our solutions deeper into the market, especially the SMB market. So it's a new route we are exploring, something that possibly had not been done in the past. So it's an era, as I said, of reinventing the past significantly, not incrementally, and yet forging new partnerships for the future.
Yeah, with reference to Airtel, one of the other partnerships you did make announcements around was with Jio. And I think Farid did talk about Jio in this keynote presentation as well. Do you think India has the chance to lead the global economy? And based on the learnings we've had from events like the ones we're dealing with right now, the pandemic of COVID-19, where do you think India's position in the global market within Google and in general as a technology ecosystem?
Look, I think India has a very big advantage, which is it's a very large consumption economy. Its parts of it have been more active than the other, and you've seen how digitization has significantly the footprint of digitization has significantly increased in these times. I've always believed that amplification will happen at times of disruption. If you look at just the telecom disruption that happened, what, 2 years ago, and I won't go into details of who did what. That's a known fact. The telecom disruption happened, and the goodness was all received by the consumer. Prices were rationalized. Bandwidth consumptions went up 10x. I have no record of how much are they now, but even if I look back 6 months, bandwidth consumption has gone up 10x. So the consumers being the recipient of that disruption. Equally so, this disruption, if you may call it the crisis or a disruption, is another opportunity for us to significantly ramp up the consumption of digitization in this country. And I see nuances of that happening through means that the government is adopting, means that the private enterprise is adopting. And I believe a lot of the assumptions, and I look at it from my perspective, we had a certain projection around the cloud. We were thinking of the cloud market to grow at a certain rate between now and the next 3 years. I guess that's going to double up. That's going to significantly increase just because people are now used to using this model of consumption way more bolder than ever before. A lot of the assumptions people had have been debunked. A lot of the barriers people had in their mind have been lowered. And I'm hoping that as we emerge out of this, there'll be a rationalization of regulation as well, so that this technology and more of the technologies around consumption can be accelerated way faster. And India, clearly given the size of the consumption economy, is always a very high focus market for everyone.
Got it. Before we let you go, just final 30 seconds, Karan. What's your biggest fear? While there are a lot of positivity, if at all, that's coming out from the pandemic, what are your fears for the next 5 to 10 years in the technology world?
Well, I don't have any fear relative to the technology world in the next 5 to 10 years. It's a landscape that is too far to predict, too out there to predict. My biggest fear right now is as we emerge out of this, we go back to doing things the old way. That is my biggest fear. And that will be the biggest lost opportunity and a crisis wasted. And I always, as much as I can and as many times as I can, repeat to people that the opportunity is for you to reinvent at a scale and pace unprecedented. Go back, put everything back to the table, and look at why you would want to do it the old way. The answer may be still yes, you want to do it the old way, but ask yourself that question 3 times. So that's my biggest fear, and I'm not fearful of technology or change over the next 5 to 10 years. Ravi.
Wonderful, awesome. If we had an opportunity, I'd like to continue this even more, but I think in the interest of time, we'll have to stop here. Thank you so much for joining us, Karan, and sharing your perspectives.
Thank you very much, Ravi. All the best.